Live for the world. I know. I'm trying, mate. I'm trying on computer. Well, just copy the link.
We're going to be starting the water.
How long is it?
Can you hear? Guys, we're going to be starting in a few minutes, so if you could take your seats, please. Thank you.
Okay, Numan.
How
much trouble you have? We're cut from the same cloth, me and you know. Usually slightly better cloth. Nobody's saying that wrong. Are they? Wallahi, brother.
जब कम था
Is it working?
Watch the seat now?
Yeah, you need to share it on the Scotland page, for Scotland page.
I'm saying we have a FOSIS.
Yeah, it's working.
We have a FOSIS Scotland YouTube channel.
It's a bit late. Yeah.
Is this streaming now?
It's streaming now, yeah.
Streaming now, but look, this is quite late because that's what you got.
What?
Okay, we can't have that because the people will be like,
Why are you so...
let it broadcast it, but we can't have it.
No, but should we broadcast on mic and on the FOSIS Scotland? Then you log the mic, right, bro?
See, your YouTube was logged in, it's red, and now it's red.
The things on my account,
So can we switch it to FOSIS?
Yeah, I don't like it.
What, to the account? What?
Not me, she.
No, but you know, but it's just the event.
Because they have the whole video gets uploaded onto the account.
True. We can export it.
I can export. I'll upload it myself later. I'll download and I'll record. I'll put it back on.
Had it been anyone else, but if you know, it's
So let's just put it.
share on the FOSIS Facebook and
How do you share it?
should be the link so.
Oh, yeah, links.
I'm giving all mine out.
My YouTube channel doesn't really support.
I'll just see question number one.
Secure my head. No, they can see history.
You can see your
question, yeah.
For me to read it.
Yeah, when the numbers count.
Give it to Anwar.
Sorry, no man, nobody should judge you.
I don't think I know.
Alright. What? No. Alright, this one. You know what to do. You can post on Scotland, yeah? Yeah.
You just copied it, yeah?
Yeah, I copied the link.
Why are those guys saying that?
Once it's copied, we will check it. See once
Put a description on it. Somewhere to say click here to
Click here to catch a live stream.
I'm going to have to check to make sure the link's going to work
Who in the cash?
Where's Ibrahim?
He's gone out.
Where are you guys not kind of saying?
I don't know. I'm going to move my stuff and go over here somewhere.
Why don't you sit behind the wheels? Why do you
Front.
yeah, the front second?
Okay. Oh yeah, I'll sit there. But the sisters are saying here.
Could be behind you.
Live stream our independence debate about.
Have you got your question?
It's here. It's here on my iPad.
Okay. Well, I'll ask.
So it's when the numbers show it.
I'll ask.
Click here to catch the live stream of our independence debate about to start in a few minutes. But shall I post it?
يلا.
ايه post بسم الله. Oh, we need to.
Now you need to place this somewhere so that they can see.
Should I turn my screen off?
Huh?
Should I turn my screen off?
Why?
In case they feel slightly.
That's a good angle.
My laptop is charged. Yeah, that'll do.
Will do.
You just fantastic.
Test this out. Hey, that's not too bad.
There's no point testing, just let it do.
No, we should test the sound to see if it's actually working.
Oh, okay. How do I test that? Do we want my plug this? Guys, give me a plug for this.
What's up, mate?
See your plug?
Huh?
See your plug?
Need a plug. It's not plugged in right now?
No, no, no. This is not perfect.
27 minutes.
Ramiz. Give Ramiz a shot. Call Ramiz and give you a shot.
No, man. Unless you put it there.
And then,
Okay, put it on that desk. Okay. Next to Aisha.
whatever.
Should we move it?
Yeah.
Bismillah.
Then their volume won't come that strong on there then.
Hmm? But they can have microphones, isn't it? Yeah, it's the live stream. Cool. Oh, your laptop is mine.
Hello. You put it there. Balance it. That doesn't come out without it.
You want to balance it there, bro.
Oh, it's fine, man. Anything happens, it's on me. That's fantastic. It's alright, it's fine. Perfect. Alright guys, well, can you hear me? Can you hear me? No? Is the mic on? The mic's not on. Oh, someone's muted it. Second. Alright, hello, can you guys hear me properly now, yeah? Alright, fantastic. Alright, welcome first of all guys, thanks for coming today to FOSIS Scotland's debate on independence, and special thank you to the guests for taking time out and giving me this insight into whether to vote yes or no. Hopefully by the end of it we have a better understanding of what we're going to choose. So before we actually start the debate, I'm going to tell you guys what FOSIS is, and this is FOSIS Scotland, as you can see in the banner there, Federation of Student Islamic Societies. So I'm going to start this wee Prezi lecture, hopefully not too boring for you guys. So first of all, FOSIS is a national organisation made up by Muslim students bodies in 7 different regions. Question? Oh, I just kept in the region. No, no worries, it's fine. Okay, so we have 7 different regions. If you look up at the screen, at the top we've got Scotland, we have Ireland, we have North, which means Scotland and Midlands, and then we've got Wales and West, and at the bottom we have London, because obviously London's very big, and South. Now, basically, the work of FOSIS, is based upon this line here. It's a quotation from the Quran. It says, "Hold fast the rope of Allah, all of you together, and do not be disunited." The important part of this is all of you hold together. The reason for this being is if all of us are going to go towards success and just do it on our own, then sorry guys, if all of us hold together and take it off. Okay, sorry guys. Sorry. So basically, FOSIS is the Federation of Student Islamic Societies. Our motto is, as you see on the screen, the main part is in the middle. All of you together. The Quranic translation from Jami'an. Jami'an means all of you together. That's the important part, because all 7 regions, the whole of UK, is that we hold it together. Moving on from there, we've been active for 50 years now. That's all the way back in '63, I think it is. And what do we do then? We have many different things, beginning from events, which is not the main part, but for some reason a lot of people think that is our main key area. This goes from doing the Quran camp, which is raising awareness of the Quran, doing competitions, etc., understand the meaning for the general public, Muslim or non-Muslim. Then we also have speaker tours. These can range from Islam speaker tours, they can range from finance, they can range from time management. Then we also have the annual conference and as well as the winter conference. This is a time when all 7 regions, all the students come together and they basically have their annual elections. This happens every year. Now, today's debate is obviously on the independence. This is one part which we go into is politics. One of the biggest supporters of FOSIS is NUS, the National University of Students. We support certain students, obviously the Muslim ones who are going on into the executive committee. We back them for their votes to give a better representation of Muslims on the actual committee, and that's the National Union of Students in general. We also have the campaigns lobbying by students, such as, we've had students lobbying for the Gaza campaign, for the tuition fees, student loans, etc. All the different issues we all hold together because obviously students are the biggest campaigning body, one of the biggest that we have. And then this is participation in NUS again. This year we have Sister Zara Sultana, I think it is, who's gone on to NUS, and she's worked up, and we've actually, I think it's 3 now on the National Executive Committee. This is ISOC training, which we did. ISOC means Islamic Society. This year is building confidence. Basically, we have so many people coming along and they want to know how to run their societies. People just come in and think, that's it, it's easily done. But to really make them strive and really make them, have this power in them, we train them in every aspect, whether that be in social aspect, and the aspect of how to talk to your unions, how to have a good committee between each other, and every way possible we try to support them. If they have a problem, we tell them. If they want to, go towards a certain way, such as doing social events, if they want to have speakers or whatever, we advise them in every way possible and make sure they don't fall in any pitfalls. Again, in joining in good, this part is really uniting all of us. Again, back to that same line, hold fast to the rope of Allah, all together, and do not be disunited. This is social events, we have national football tournaments, this is the Quran conference again, everyone come together for the Quran competition. And this is United ISOCs, basically there's things such as charity week happen throughout the year. This is an example from that. Everything else, we have all regions, many things that they come together with. And today, we're doing this as FOSIS Scotland, but we have people from the National Committee here, one being our Vice President of Islam Societies, Faisal at the back, and Ibrahim Ali, who is the Vice President of Student Affairs. Now, we have different organizations we work with. Obviously, the scholars, there's Mufti Ismail Mehdi worked in the past. Very well known, Malcolm X is one of the very first people we had coming in 50 years ago. We also have Idris Tawfiq. He is a revert Muslim and he's does a lot of work on the actual empowering students part, teaching them how to go about having good character, etc. Now, organizations away from actual individuals, this is ethical. There's Al-Maghrib, which we get speakers, but this is slightly old presentation, is widening. We have many people approaching this, but these are some of the main institutes that we have coming across. And Human Appeal, they're one of our big sponsors, is in Ireland and across the UK. They're always helping us for our charity events. Now, many more, obviously, like I said, is growing and growing and growing. So if you want to get involved, which we do recommend, myself, this is only my first year in FOSIS, but I've been involved in my Islam Society at Glasgow University, as well as the rest of the committee. In my own team, there's myself, I'm Vice Chair, Zara Sayyid, who's Chair of the region, but also Chair on today's debate. We have the rest of the team, it'll take a bit of time mentioning them all, but inshallah you'll meet them at the end. Now, if you're part of us, you're really going to make a big change, such as today. We've also had Fresher Packs coming in, which features all the new Muslim students coming on campus on how to basically go about their life in actually a university environment, halal, haram, etc., etc. You can volunteer, whether it be small or big. You don't have to actually be part of the actual committee. Whether you're a school leaver or you're actually at university, it doesn't make a difference. You can be volunteering today, you can be volunteering such as charity-wise, anything, whatever your interest. Inshallah, there's a way which we can implement it. Oh. Bear with me a second. Oh.
Keep going the same direction.
Just doesn't want to.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Take it once.
Do you want all of them at the same time?
Shut it down. I'm gonna. I'm gonna go upside down, right? There's not much left on it. It's fine. You can volunteer. This is support. Support is donations. Mashallah, the line turned upside down now. Donations wise, it keeps the actual organisation going, whether it be £1 a week, if it's £100 donation, whatever you can. But most of all, more than the money, more than anything else, is support, and it means, Allah means prayer, making prayer for yourselves towards Allah, God, also supporting each other. If you see someone needs a bit of help, give them advice, whatever, whether you're part of a student body, whether you're part of anything else, it doesn't matter, we need your support in every aspect. Lastly, just for more info, you can go to the links there. Generally, it's you can just Google FOSIS for FOSIS Scotland. The links will come up quite easily. Won't really be a problem there. And again, that's just more contact details. So that's what FOSIS basically is. Thanks for listening, guys, and thanks for coming again. I'm going to kick off the debate by passing it on to Zara. So on you go, Zara.
Okay. Ooh, whoa. I think we should do them a clap.
That was my first time actually, so
I think we call them things style, whether it's upside down or the right way around or whatever. Okay, so another part that you've all been waiting for.
Before you carry on, the young man kept talking about regions. Scotland is a nation in its own right. I just wanted to make that point.
See you politicians. Keep yourself. Okay. That's basically the debate is an artist.
It's not a debate. It was just a definition.
Thank you for the clarification. Okay, so I'm going to be your chair today. I'm also the chair of Scotland, funnily enough. Just to let our panelists know, I will be very strict with you. I do have a dark side, but I prefer us not to go there. So what we're going to be doing is, just to go over the format so everybody understands, we're going to take 2 questions from the floor, and then I'll put it to each side, and then we'll just play a bit of song until we get somewhere, and then we'll move on. So I hope everybody's got their thinking caps on. And I've got a little tip for the audience. This is an open forum. We encourage debate, and we also encourage everybody to respect everybody's opinion. Whether you've made up your mind or not, the reason there are 2 sides to every argument is because both are valid. And so we just want to make sure you know, before you go crazy, we're watching. And we'll get mean to you too. Okay, so I think Ikra is going to start us off with our first question. You're going to have to go much louder than that. Come on, put your passion into it.
UK has been the world's most successful economic partnership for over 300 years. Scotland has access to a domestic market 12 times our size. Why did we give this up?
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Do you have a question?
Well, we could take an introduction from the panel members.
Oh yeah, oh my gosh. Wow, sorry guys. I just thought they're so well known. We've had so many independence debates. Everybody knows. So I'd like to actually, just sorry about that, forgive me, take 1 second to introduce our lovely panel today. We have on my right, for the Yes campaign, Graham Campbell. He's the chair for Africans for Independence, and he's also part of the Scottish Social. I have the lovely Tasmina Sheikh, who's also been a Scottish National Party member of the European Parliament candidate. And then to my left, our Better Together team, we have Shiraz Ahmed, who keep up to date with his blog, his radio, and everything else that he does. And again, the lovely Pauline, who used to be a former Labour MSP. I have to say I'm very, very privileged to be sitting up here with all of them. And just to say that on our Facebook, on the page, we already had compliments to having such a diverse panel that was reflective of Scotland. Because too much of the time we just see people talking on behalf of us, not people that really talk for us. Okay, so question number 2. Has anybody got question number 2? Or will I just open up the panel? Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna let one of the audience ask another question. The topic is employment. Does anybody have a question on employment? There we go. Yeah.
Could independence lead to a race to the bottom with cutting company tax and companies relocating to the lowest tax part of this island, endangering jobs on both sides of the border?
Okay, thank you very much. So we've got the two questions, and I'd like to just start with Tasmina.
Sure. First of all, assalamu alaikum to everybody. Good evening. Can I thank FOSIS for the invitation and the very eloquent introduction, although the computer didn't play with you, that's a shame. You handled it extremely well. Well done for the ad-libbing there. And thank you very much indeed for the question, indeed a very pertinent one. What I would say to you is that the union that we've had in excess of 300 years doesn't feel like it's working for most of the people that live in Scotland. The reason I say that is in the past year alone, we've had a 400% rise in the use of food banks in Scotland. We now face the prospect of 100,000 children going into poverty, and that is because despite its wealth, the United Kingdom is one of the most unequal nations in the Western world. In fact, it ranks number 4 on the OECD list of unequal countries. Therefore, the question is, why is our wealth not working for more of our people? And that is a real challenge. And that is why I believe that the decision should be made about how Scotland's wealth is spent by the people of Scotland. And we are a hugely wealthy nation. I don't think that's now in dispute by anybody, whether you're talking about our contribution to tax, and we have paid more tax per head to the UK Treasury in every single one of the last 33 years. Yes, we have huge oil wealth, but of course that's expendable. Of course that will come to an end, there's no doubt about that, but we're already planning for life beyond hydrocarbons. We have 25% of the renewable energy of the whole of Europe. So the question is, why for the average person on the street is the wealth not working? And that's because it's unfairly distributed. That's because there needs to be a better stewardship of our resources so that the majority of people in Scotland feel the benefit. I think the chair's going to stop me here.
That's me, right. Okay, I'm going to pass it over here. Sharad, would you like to go?
Thank you. A very interesting number, there's a whole lot of stats, I can split some stats and Tasmina can apply. A very interesting number is that Scotland, just answering that young lady's question, Scotland does 70% or sends 70% of its exports to the rest of the UK. Now folks, grasp that figure, we do 70% of all exports, we sell 70% of all exports to the rest of the UK, not to the rest of the world. Why would you want to put a barrier, with an international barrier, with your biggest customer? Now, I think we touched on unemployment and poverty, and we spoke about food banks. Well, folks, creating barriers within the UK won't resolve those issues. Independence isn't a panacea. Independence won't make food poverty or make work pay for people. That requires hard work and actions. Now, what I would suggest is Scotland requires more powers to resolve some of these issues that are pushed upon. Well, the Scotland 2012 Act already deepens devolution for Scotland. We don't need independence, we just need, if we require more powers, the powers are there for us to take.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, I'm going to see if we can develop some of these points a little bit further. Okay, would you like to rebuttal?
Yeah, well, I would indeed. The comment that Shiraz made, which I agree with, making work pay. Well, how can we make work pay? We don't have control over the minimum wage here in Scotland. That's determined by Westminster. And if there's unequal pay, it's because Westminster has decided not to increase the minimum wage in line with inflation. So we've got food prices rising. We have food prices rising and welfare and minimum wage not rising in line with it to make people have an ability to afford to eat. Secondly, in terms of the Equal Pay Act, which has been enforced for 44 years, and I'm addressing this to all of the women in the audience here, 44 years the Equal Pay Act has been enforced and still women don't have rights to equal pay, and that's not a failure of the Scottish Government, it's a failure of what's happening at Westminster. So in terms of employment, let's make a really important point. The Scottish Government is the only government in these islands who has a dedicated youth employment minister, youth and women's employment minister. That's how high up the agenda employment is for the Scottish Government. And the statistics are interesting. We have 73.5% employment in Scotland. That's up 63,000 in the last year alone, against 73% in the UK. Female employment, of course I'm going to speak as women on this panel, 69.8% female employment in Scotland as opposed to 68% in the UK. And that's just because of some of the policies we have. The Scotland Act 2012 doesn't give us anywhere near the powers we need to create the society we want, which is a fair, equal, more prosperous for all of our people, not just the chosen few.
So I can see that Pauline would like to come back, and I'm going to come to the gentleman in the audience here.
Okay, I mean, for me, the question that was put, why change it, is for me the central question and why I'm voting no in the referendum. The economic success of the United Kingdom is something which is unrivaled. We have a unique union where we have our own Scottish Parliament, we can make some of our own decisions, and some of those decisions are made at Westminster. I think it's important to differentiate between the framework of the United Kingdom and the pooling and sharing of resources. Benefits, for example, Scotland gets more out of the Union than it puts in because we have an ageing population. So in some benefits we don't. But that is well, we do actually, I mean, I have the figures if you want me to quote them. In terms of old age pensions, the bill for Scotland is higher than it is in the rest. Now, what I'm demonstrating here is that being part of a wider union means that it does redistribute the wealth within the United Kingdom because we take some more out and we put in other cases that may not. But I mean, Tasmania is confusing a lot of different issues. The minimum wage. I mean, the minimum wage was brought in by a Westminster Labour government. The Equal Pay Act. Of course, we don't have equality in Britain. It's a suggestion that if we have independence, that somehow all of these things are going to be resolved. So I think it's important. What we're debating here is whether or not Scotland should vote alone. The policies of the government of the day are a completely separate matter. And I will finish on this because it is an important point. Look, I understand that the procurement bill, which went through the Scottish Parliament not so long ago, had no commitment to the living wage, which many people in this room support.
Okay, I'm going to get Graham in here as well, but I'd like to just go to the gentleman in the blue shirt there.
Just a quick question. Yeah, we talked about a lot of employment. Why would the Scottish government, not supposed to have zero contracts? Because the majority of the things you just noticed, they are zero contracts. They don't really help, day-to-day young people.
Do you want to again come in and then I'll answer? Okay, so Graham, feel free to just make a point on the issue.
The question was two. There's one about the successful economic union argument, and the other argument which was about the race to the bottom. And I'll try to list both of those in the same breath if I can. First of all, I'm going to say this from a point of view of African Caribbean community activist. Although today's figures in terms of unemployment are very good news in the sense that Scotland, in fact, outperforming economically the rest of the UK in terms of creating jobs. In fact, the rate of unemployment amongst young people, 16 to 19-year-olds, dropped by 25% in 2013-2014. And in fact, today, Glasgow's unemployment rate amongst young people dropped by 490. But Glasgow is actually outperforming the rest of the UK economy. Now, why is that? It's down to a complex, long argument which we haven't got time to develop here. But it's not because of the UK. It's because the UK actually is next to a massive 500 million market in Europe that most foreign investors invest in. Now, that can't be an accident. The other point about borders to control how trade goes, well, the Republic of Ireland also sends 60% of its exports to the rest of the British Isles, and they've been independent for 80 years, so I don't think really a border matters that much. The question is, what powers do they have? The question is, if Ireland, they're part of a European currency, I'm not in favour of that European currency, but the fact is, in Scotland, we can control those tax rates perhaps more effectively for our interests. Now, for the rest of the bottom issue, I actually don't think it will lead to that, because Scotland's and England's economy, if you like, are much more in conformity. That's why they're probably more suited to having a currency union. Personally, if it was up to me, I'd prefer to go for a full independence of the currency. But it's a good arrangement for now. I don't think it will lead to the race to the bottom, because I think we're already there. The zero-hour contracts point you made, well, hundreds of thousands of the jobs that are out there are cheap labour jobs. Many of you students here will be working on contracts like that. I'm not in favour of that kind of society, but with the powers and control over the economy and over labour legislation, independent Scotland can change that. It's not going to change under the UK because their economy depends on this exploitation now. If you want to end exploitation, you have to vote yes.
Before I'm going to let Tasmina come in, I think Amna has a question for us as well. Okay. Amna, would you like to speak out here? Nice and loud, please.
How are we going to inspire young people, whether independence happens or not, to trust the government with their future job opportunities in the current climate?
Okay, so did everybody hear that? How are we going to inspire young people, whether independence happens or not, with any government, for future job opportunities in the current climate. So I'd like to develop our conversation a bit more and move towards this direction. So I think it was, I'll let someone on this side have a go and we'll come back.
Folks, we've touched on a lot of points. There's a mention made of the fact that we sit next to Europe, and a lot of the success within Scotland is because of the mass market that we have in Europe. Well, we've got an internal domestic market, and that's the UK. I simply don't see why, if it's good, if we're developing all the success because of Europe, why can't we have the trade that we have with the UK? Why can't we do business that we do with the UK and create the success and growth that we currently have at the moment? We can, and I think we should ascribe some of the success that the UK has as an economic union to the UK, rather than saying, look, it's Europe. Now, there's a mention made of Ireland. Well, I remember a time when Alex Salmon was talking about the Celtic Tiger. There's also, Alex Salmon once mentioned Iceland and the Ark of Prosperity. The SNP, or folk on the yes side, will say anything for independence. I mean, this isn't something that's happened overnight. This isn't something that's happened recently. The SNP were canvassing, were campaigning for independence long before there's a European market, long before any of these issues that have been touched upon by this panel were raised. This has got nothing to do with some of these issues that are pointed out by the panel. This is all about the yes desire for independent Scotland.
Okay. Well, you heard him then. Will the SNP do anything to get independence? And can we touch on the young lady's point? How are we going to inspire the young people?
Yeah, that as well, yeah.
Yes, I'm just going through the Cheryl. Whoever the Cheryl asked me to do so, if you would allow me, I'll answer that gentleman's question also. Sorry, I just want to be clear before we move on. Is the suggestion from this side of the table that the rest of the United Kingdom is no longer going to trade with Scotland if there is a democratic vote for independence for Scotland? Is that what you are saying this evening? Can we clarify that?
Actually, hold on a minute. Actually, I believe you have questions to answer. So sure.
Okay, that's one I posed. Delighted to answer questions. Also would be obliged to receive answers to some too. Thank you very much, Chair. So I'm very interested in what the position is going to be post-independence. Democratic will of the people of Scotland vote yes. Is the rest of the UK saying they're not going to trade with Scotland despite trading with every other nation in the world? Point number one. The other point I wanted to bring back just in terms of minimum wage. Just introducing minimum wage isn't enough. The question is, after 13 years of government at Westminster, what you've done to increase that minimum wage. Second point I wanted to make about the living wage. It is in fact the Scottish Government that introduced the living wage, and that's paid to Scottish Government employees. And the only reason it couldn't be introduced in the procurement bill is because it goes against EU regulations. If we had our own seat at the top table in Europe after independence, I can assure you we'd be fighting for a living wage for the people of Scotland. In terms of inspiring young people, fantastic question. I think one way we can handle that is via what we do in terms of our students who come here to work, to learn and study. The current immigration rules prevent us from allowing those young people who educate themselves here in 5 of the top 200 universities in the world from allowing themselves to make a life here and a home here, and I think that's something that we can do to inspire young people. I also think it's important that we retain free education. That, I believe, is an entitlement of all people, of all of our students across Scotland, to have free education. South of the border, unfortunately, our counterparts, and there are a couple sitting in the audience, very welcome here from London and Birmingham, who are part of FOSIS, who won't have the benefit of that, of the £9,000 fees that they have to pay south of the border. There.
Okay, thank you very much.
My point still wasn't answered.
Really? After all that? I'm sure I should have did it.
0 hours contract. I beg your pardon, I'm so sorry. Absolutely, I'm against 0 hours contracts. These are not something that have arisen as a result of anything that the Scottish Government have done. This is a situation that's been allowed to be created because of Westminster's misgovernance. That's what's happened. 0 hour contracts, of course, should be outlawed. I say that as a woman as well, and we are disproportionately affected by 0 hours contracts that don't allow us to take up. We have to be busy. Well, I'm trying to answer the question.
No, I need to give the other side a chance. So
answer is not in favour of them. Answer to that question is we need to take control of employment and economic leaders in our own hands to create a better society for the rest of Scotland.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I think I've got a lot to get through. I think it's quite important perhaps just to stick to the question. So I'm not going to answer some of the points that Tahima put, because I'm sure we'll get to them about Cheshire fees and so on, but that's not because I don't have anything to say. The question about how do we inspire young people, well, my view on this is it does matter what programmes governments have, what policies governments have, whether it's Labour, SNP or any other political party. That's what matters. I believe that devolution does work, and what matters is having the right programmes. For example, if you look at the work that's been done around apprenticeship schemes, I mean, to be fair, both Labour and the SNP government have done a great deal to introduce thousands of apprenticeship schemes throughout Scotland. But the point is this: we were able to achieve youth employment through having devolution as part of the United Kingdom. We don't need independence to inspire young people to jobs. I wanted to answer the other question about the race to the bottom. I presume this is about the suggestion that in an independent Scotland that we would reduce corporation tax. Well, there's different views as to whether or not that would actually attract more investment or not. But there's 2 points to make. First of all, a reduction in corporation tax obviously means there is less money getting paid into the exchequer, so that would have to be found from somewhere. And some people think it would be a race to the bottom, because if you reduce corporation tax to 20%, then England will reduce its corporation tax accordingly, and then no one gets the benefit of it. So it's not an absolute foolproof answer to say that simply reducing corporation tax will lead to more investment and more jobs. There are certainly risks in doing that.
Okay, thank you, Pauline. Okay, so I'd like to move the conversation. You want to come back? I'm going to give you 45 seconds. Okay? Well, you better make it enough.
Folks, very well, let me start on the corporation tax. It's in only about 45 seconds. Joseph Stiglitz, who's the economic advisor for the First Minister, he's come out and said the 3% corporation tax cut is a gift to corporations. Now, I understand we've got a gentleman on the panel who's also a socialist. I'm curious to hear his point of view. How, as a socialist, can he respect the FM's decision to keep corporation tax 3% lower than the rest of the UK? The second point I'd like to make, the calculations that the FM has made, Alexander has made on the 3% corporation tax, they've been derided by people from the Yes campaign already. Robert McAlpine, people from the Common Wheel, they all said this is based on flawed thinking, it doesn't work. And if anyone's got access to the internet, you'll Google the Laffer theory. 40 years of research by Laffer, who came up with this theory of cutting corporation tax to increase economic growth, has shown no result. So not only is it a flawed theory, I wonder how it flies in the face of the socialist utopia that we're getting painted on this panel.
Okay, I can see the side on my right about to like massacre me if I don't give it to them. But I'm going to let everybody know we are moving on after this. Finish up your business and then we're going to currency. Okay?
Yes.
Okay?
Okay, let's start from the beginning. As a socialist, I'm in favour of taxing the rich. Unfortunately, the Labour Party, when it was in office, and I know this, I used to be a Labour member, so I was one of those inside the party who fought against these type of policies under Tony Blair, remember him? Sorry, I'll try not to say his name for the rest of the evening, you won't. They cut corporation tax when they're in government, so twice, if I remember rightly. So they obviously thought that Laffer curve worked. I don't. I'm against capitalist economics. I also don't think that cutting corporation tax is the correct thing, but the problem is you haven't got a choice. This is about whether citizens can choose a government which supports higher taxes or lower taxes. Well, you have no real choice because all the parties at Westminster support low taxes for the rich, high taxes for the poor, bailing out the rich and the bankers, and not bailing out the citizens. Well, if you want something different, you have to have the powers to do that. At the moment, we have no powers to do that. So let's write yourself in the powers of independence so that you can choose in 2016 a different party or a different government that stands for a different economic policy. That's what I'll be standing for if there is one.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, can I get question number 5 from the audience? Do we know? Okay, there we go, Ehsan.
How can a currency union where England controls our financial assets create an independent country? Because as you know, Scotland at the moment doesn't have a central bank. And if we do go independent, we'll be depending on the English bank, which will be governed by English laws, which then will be a foreign country. So how are you going to base our financial system that our main banks are in? How are you going to do that?
Okay, I think because I'm going to pass over here and then we'll come back to the SMPK.
I don't know if you folk are aware, the Alex Salmond's policy is to force or impose on the UK this idea of currency union. all the main unionist parties have said we will not allow currency union to take place because it doesn't make sense. So what we're left with is Alex Salmond and the SNP unilaterally using the pound. If they can't have the sterling zone, all main parties have said this is going to happen. The Governor of Bank of England has also said this is going to happen. So they'll be forced, and unless they come up with a new Scottish currency at the growth, they'll be forced to use sterling without a lender of last resort backing them. So what you'll have in essence is a situation where Panama uses the dollar, especially creditors. I mean, I don't want to get upset. Where Panama uses the dollar. Panama uses the dollar without any regard to interest rates that are set and controlled by the US. And that's what will happen. This isn't independence. If we use sterling out with a currency union, what will happen is the Bank of England will set up interest rates, and currency determines every aspect of what we do as a country.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I would advise Shiraz that Professor Anton Muscatelli, who was behind the Calman Commission and the 2012 Act, it would be advantageous to both countries to have a sterling union, and even with fiscal in-debt rule, the rest of the UK and Scottish Government would have considerable leeway to pursue very different policies. And in actual fact, that's something that Gordon Brown said about the entirety of the United States. Now, I knew you were going to, I smiled, not because I'm concerned about anything other than your remarks. And again, you brought up Panama, which I think you referred to the Banana Republic on Sky News. A few facts and figures about Panama. Yes, indeed, they use the US dollar. And their growth rate since 2010 has been 9.16 per year compared to UK's 0.8%. So, as you've also referred to Scotland as a foreign country, let's be clear about one thing. An independent Scotland will show ultimate respect to all of the nations that make up this world, regardless of where they come from and regardless of what policies they adopt, because that is the kind of reputation I would like on the international stage. In terms of a currency union, it's in the best interest of Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom, and we should be arguing quite firmly for what is in the best interest of both countries, not just one.
Okay, thank you. We're going to let Pauline come in here.
Yeah, second to the question. In an independent Scotland, in the negotiation that would take place, though we've heard that the First Minister, or the position of the Yes campaign is that they would want to be part of the formal currency union. But that requires consent of the rest of the UK. And it doesn't really matter whether I support it, and I suppose, although I'm a no supporter, let's be clear, who knows what will happen on the 18th of September. Then obviously you'd want the best for your country. But that doesn't mean to say that will happen, and I think that's the problem. But let's say it did happen, and I suppose that's what the question is really suggesting. If Scotland was accepted as an independent nation as part of the currency union, which Mark Carnahan said is not advisable, however, Scotland would have to present its budget. So it's not going to be independent in that sense, and there will certainly be severe constraints on public spending if Scotland has to present its budget. And that is the issue of the currency. That even if it was accepted, it's really a million miles away from being independent because it has to have to present its budget to another country.
I actually going to welcome Pauline's comment there, because actually that's a recognition that actually if there was a vote that she disagrees with, in fact there would be a best solution for Scotland. Alistair Darling actually was not able to make himself say that in the debate last week. It's good that somebody from the No campaign has said that if Scotland went in, it should have a currency union. That can be arranged. Now, personally, I think that there's some logic that the fact is, for the transitional period, we will have a currency union in practice until we become independent, if we vote yes. But I want to raise this point to all of you. Each one of you has these notes. Every one of you have used these notes all of your lives. I don't know if you've noticed, but the three different banks that we use their currency, these are currencies. You're using three of them every day of your lives, or you have done, all of your working lives, all your parents have done too. So the idea that currency doesn't work, Scotland, there's many ways in which you can use a currency. My preferred option would be to have an independent one, but if the consent is given in the ballot for a currency union for Scotland, that's what they should get. And the English government is not going to do something which is in the direct counter interest to its own producers and own businesses. Why would they stop? Sorry, I'll be very brief. I'll finish this one sentence. I'll say this: 12.5% of the bank balance of the UK Treasury would be lost if they refused to let Scotland use the pound. They would have a run on the pound in England, would damage their economy. They wouldn't do something as stupid and economically vandalistic as that. They're lying now. They will have a currency union.
Before I let the rebuttal come, do we have any other questions from the floor? Anybody else? Okay.
The No campaign are suggesting that if we do keep a currency union, then Scotland will not was not really an independent country.
No, I said we won't have a currency union.
Why won't we have a currency
Because
union? Alistair Darling says we could have a currency union. And it's
Okay, I just need one question.
My question is,
is,
if you do have a currency union, Scotland.
Wait for it.
No, you don't know if you don't.
Okay.
That's up to
Okay, I'm gonna okay, not a referee here. You will not.
My question is Germany and France are part of. Sorry, I just want to ask a
Okay,
question so you have
guys,
everything answered.
okay.
Right?
You ask the question and then I'll put it to the panel.
If you're saying that if we have a currency union, that Scotland isn't really independent, then is Germany and France not independent countries? Do they have a currency union?
Before I let you answer, hold on, Shiraz, before I let you answer, anybody else got questions? Then we'll move on. Anybody different got any questions? No?
What you've seen in the
Okay, I'll go to Fraz.
very quickly, 30 seconds.
You're going to get to answer it, but I want to take 2 questions and then it'll help us to move on quickly. Okay, Fraz.
Talking about a mandate, I imagine you're talking about Alexander on TV.
Yeah.
Then people, yes, that there's a mandate for a currency union. That's not what we voted for here. The Green Party isn't wanting a currency union. They don't want to use the pound. So how do you balance that with the yes campaign?
Okay, so I'm going to let Shiraz come in and deal with that question and then I'll pass it over, okay?
Folks, a couple of points. I don't know how much time I've got, but just let me tell you, Jim Sellers, Patrick Harvey, Dennis Canavan, Colin Fox, all members of the Yes campaign, they've all said it's nonsense, this whole idea of a currency union for you, Sterling. They're on record, they're all respected politicians, and they've all said there's no way it makes sense for Scotland to have a currency union. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Governor of the Bank of England, the Shadow Chancellor Ed Balls, and Danny Alexander, the Permanent Secretary of State of the Treasury, they have all said it doesn't make any sense for Rump UK to have a currency union with Scotland. And the reason for that is to have a proper currency union, the way you have in the EU, I think you referred to that a few minutes ago. There has to be a ceding of sovereignty. You can't have a fiscal union or a monetary union without some form of political union. Now, why we are being asked to vote for independence, then we are asked to turn around and cede some political sovereignty to the rest of the UK, and the rest of the UK is being asked to cede that political sovereignty to us as well, because what will happen in practice is the Bank of England will be the lender of last resort. Why would they take that liability? It doesn't make sense. I mean, we can vote very quickly. We can vote as much as we want if we want a currency union. It depends what is in the best interest of Rump UK, and Rump UK has consistently said it's not in our best interest to have a currency union with the rest of Scotland. Very quickly, your point on Germany, your point on the euro. The reason you had such chaos in southern Europe, in countries like Greece, Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Cyprus, was because they're in a currency union. They could not devalue their currency and export their way out of the current crisis, because they were forced to stick to budget agreements that they had made with the European Central Bank, and were forced to accept the interest rates posed by the European Central Bank. And on the point made at the end there about the currency, very quick, I'll chance that point. Sterling is a fiat currency. That means any country, tomorrow we can use the dollar if we want, we can use the shekel or the rupee in Scotland. That's fine, no one's arguing about that. So.
Right, we're done. Okay, I'm going to let Graham come in here.
Oh, let's calm down with this, right? Sorry, I'm mumbling away. Listen, it's pretty straightforward. The currency union will happen because the bosses on both sides of the borders will see it's in their interest to do so. Quite simple. It's obvious that they do not want...
Can you tell me why...
Excuse me, don't. I didn't talk to you. Don't dare interrupt me. Now, it's pretty straightforward. They will agree it because it's in their mutual interest. They're saying no now because that's part of the campaign. You can understand why that's happening now. But they're not going to do something which is actively against their own self-interest. pretty straightforward. Yes, there are people on my side, and I'm one of them, that doesn't agree with the SNP's policies, but they're the ones who got us the referendum, they're the ones who won the election, which we wouldn't have had the referendum without, they're the ones who are putting forward the Scottish Government document which puts out that case. Now, it's a valid position, I happen not to agree with it, and Patrick Harvey and the rest of them, they don't agree with it either, I want something else. But we'll have an election in 2016 where we'll be able to choose political parties which have different positions on those things. At the moment, you have no choice on that because you haven't got the powers. And as for interest rates in the Bank of England, it's an obvious thing that Scotland could easily have a representative on the Monetary Policy Committee. I think that the Scottish Government representative sitting down there in London and actually make some more sensible decisions because, frankly, if you look at their track record recently, they don't know how to forecast the economy. They're the ones who governed it when the financial crash and international banking crisis happened. Do you really trust those guys to set your interest rate? Or, okay, fine. Not my idea. You're capitalist. You work out a solution you think works. But I'd rather nationalise the banks, control it internationally through cooperation between countries, and have the people have a real say over the economy.
Thank you very much. I'm going to just like to Mina come in on a couple of points and then I'll pass it over.
Small question. General was the Scottish representative in London, but fiscally Scotland. Why would they allow that?
Because I think that sharing a currency is obviously a currency union between two governments. So the two governments would have to negotiate the terms. Now, I think that's the most likely position they'll end up with.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of points I wanted to make. Thank you very much, Shiraz, for quoting Joe Stiglitz, who said, in fact, the First Minister's position is absolutely legitimate. Westminster's refusal is a bluff. To compare Germany and Greece to the relationship with England and the rest of Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom makes no fiscal sense whatsoever. We are in an optimal currency zone. Secondly, your bedfellows in the campaign, Ruth Davidson said she's supportive of a currency union. In fact, Jackson Carlo said he would man the barricades, to quote him exactly, in terms of making sure Scotland got the best deal. And Gordon Brown said in June himself, Gordon Brown, that the threat to block a currency union by Osborne was propaganda which the Scots would see as bullying. Let's bring this down to common sense. Yes, there are many differing views within those who support yes, and that's fantastic, because guess what? We have a load of competing positive visions for a future Scotland. What does the other side have to offer? No vision, just fear, just scaremongering stories. Regardless of the outcome of the referendum, well, it's all relevant in terms of the currency union. But to quote you, I think you quoted, I think in fact I'll tell him tomorrow, I think you quoted Patrick Harvey there, albeit selected, I'll let him know that you agree with everything that he says. In terms of all of the other politicians, people who are involved, people who are selective, I think choice it was. In terms of all of those involved in the campaign, it is important to see, and the most important point is, post a yes vote, and in between the period between September and March 2016, each of the political parties in Scotland, and it will give the Labour Party perhaps a chance to find itself once more, will put forward their prospectus for what the first independent parliament could look like after the first election. It will be up to them to suggest maybe if they want to have a further vision for the future. At the moment, the First Minister has the mandate to negotiate with the people of Scotland, and if there's nothing that can be challenged, is that the First Minister has always, will always, act in the best interest of the people of Scotland.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'd like us to move on a little bit now. I think we're actually just going to have to move on, given the time, to our third topic, which is education. I'm very sorry, but we will have a little extra question and answer session at the end, so I'd like you to hold your questions for us. Okay, let's move on. We're going to be talking about education now. So, question number 8, are you with us? There we go. Mr. Noah, would you like to give us a question?
Can an independent Scotland realistically maintain a fiscally free education?
Okay, I'm going to pass that on to...
I think the first point is, it's important, I think, to note that there are no tuition fees for Scottish students now, and that has been achieved under devolution. So if you believe in that, you don't need independence. It means a lot of these questions around will the NHS be privatised, I think it's very important to assert that, I suppose it's our position, which is we have independence over these issues now. It's up to us what we decide on the policies of education, depending of course which government is in power. So to me, there's no difference. We have the powers now. If that matters to you, then we have the powers now at devolution. We don't need independence to achieve it.
in a bit.
That's my point.
Okay,
Right,
yeah.
you're saying that the devolved power are actually better at this, so why would you not want to be in control of everything if we're already making better decisions over things we don't know?
Okay, we'll come back.
Thank you very much indeed, sister, for your question. It's important to make a couple of distinctions here. The reason we have free education in Scotland is because it's an SNP government's policy. Now, via the Barnett formula, it's SNP's policy, and I'm interested to hear when the mic gets passed along to Shiraz, I'd like to hear what the Labour Party's Cuts Commission, Joanne Lambert's Cuts Commission has got to say about free student education, because we're not sure about what that is. You'd asked the question about whether we would have free education in independent Scotland. I absolutely fundamentally believe we do. The Scottish Government's current SNP government has got form on that because they're the ones that introduced free tuition. They will stand by it. I think it's something that should also be enshrined in the Constitution so that the people of this nation can be assured in all time immemorial that this free education, because that's absolutely their right. At the moment, it is a spending choice that we have to make. I think we should have all of the powers within our control so we can spend even more on educating our young people. That is our responsibility, and you're right.
That's it back here. So, I mean, the question is, how are we going to maintain it? We've got a lot of priorities that we're going to be spending on.
If you are in favour of free university education, vote no. and I'd be happy to explain why. The reason for that is, at the moment, the SNP government discriminates against other UK students. So if you're a UK student from outside Scotland and you come to Scotland, you have to pay for your university education. Now, the SNP have suggested that once Scotland becomes independent and we will become members of the European Union. Well, European Union law doesn't allow discrimination. If we become members of the European Union, if we're offering free university education to Scots, we will have to offer free university education to other students from the rest of the UK. Now, the Education Minister for the SNP has described that as a flood of fee refugees coming to Scotland from the UK. He's quoted a figure of £150 million, which hasn't been costed in the white paper, if all these UK students come to Scotland for this free education. So my point being, if you want free university education, vote no. Just on the sister's point about more powers, a lot of people don't realise this. The 2012 Scotland Act deepens devolution. So if we vote no on September 18th, it's not respecting the status quo. We will get a deepening of devolution because of the 2012 Scottish Act. And one last point before I pass it on, very quickly, historically within the UK, devolution hasn't been imposed. Every time we ask for more powers, powers have been granted to us. Although I do know that the SNP have constantly resisted that.
The topic is education, so come on, let's think of education. Right?
I'll pass it through. Can we be perfectly clear on one point? It is a Scottish Government spending choice to ensure free tuition for our students in Scotland. It is our UK Westminster spending choice to charge you £9,000 a year for education in the rest of the United Kingdom. Isn't the question, why are students in the rest of the United Kingdom being charged £9,000 a year, the highest fees in Europe? Why are we spending £100 billion of weapons of mass destruction on the people of England, the rest of the United Kingdom, for whom I feel they have an entitlement, should also have free tuition? That is a spending choice of Westminster. That is a prime example of why we in Scotland do it so much better. We need all the fiscal levers to our hands to make sure we can create a more fair and equal society.
What I want to do is we've got some students in the audience, so I want to bring them in a little bit next time over there, and then I'm going to come back to before we say one point.
First of all, I'd like to thank the panelists for showing up today. It's a really great debate. I'm seeing a bit heated. Please don't jump over that. Okay? I'm going to take a quotation here from the Yes Campaign website. Okay, I got this off a week ago. So it says here, whether or not Scotland continues with the policy of free tuition will depend on who is elected to form the government, the Scottish government, at the election scheduled in May 2016. Is that right? Okay. So can you tell me then how the SNP can promise free tuition? Because if we get independence, okay, and if they are not elected, which I think they won't be because they've served their purpose. Nobody likes that.
It's okay, that's fine, yeah, we're okay with that.
If we do get independence, okay, and we become an independent country, and the SNP are not elected, all the promises that they are making do not have to be upheld. Because they're saying we're going to give you free tuition, we're going to have more employment, we're going to have this, this, and this. But the fact is that's SNP policy. It's not constitutionally based. So if Labour is elected, if say Scotland Labour, Labour Scotland is elected, they don't have to uphold any of these policies. So basically they've been making promises that they might not be able to deliver. And can I add, and this is a question.
You got 5 seconds to add.
Okay. Are the SNP using these promises, as I call them, are they using these promises to anchor a position in the future? Because they'll say, oh well, you know, if you don't elect us, you won't get these promises fulfilled. So are they?
Okay, so I think if I'm going to just suggest quickly if you make a question really, really brief.
Yeah, sure. May I talk about Fair Scotland? Yeah, they're cutting down courses and places in colleges and giving that money to universities. What about the people who don't have 5 years and they go to college costs before they move to university? You're sitting there, transform them, and you call it free.
Thank you for your question. Thank you for your question. Okay, I think only fair that we do go to SNP who is. And then, yeah, we're going to let Pauline come in, so I'm going to let Mia respond and I'll give Pauline.
Your point that you make, let's be clear, it is the SNP government who've delivered free education. Do you believe that we should charge student fees?
Do you believe that SNP will be elected?
I'm asking you, the policy, free education, well, free education is one of the SNP's policies. There is nothing to prevent any other political party in Scotland suggesting that they will do exactly the same thing, apart from lack of will to do so. We are waiting to hear back from the Labour Party. Please let me answer your question, sir, because I'm going to answer it. And we're waiting to hear back from the Labour Party in terms of their cuts commission as to whether or not they will support free education, whether within the current setup or beyond that. You speak of a constitution, we don't have a constitution. I'm not a politician, I'm not in government, but I can say this. I do fundamentally believe that free education should be enshrined in a constitution. So when we have, and if we have a Labour Party in government, the students in Scotland can be guaranteed they'll have free education forever.
Okay, I'm going to pass to Pauline and we'll see what the other hand says. Okay, sorry, we're moving to Pauline. Thank you.
I mean, I agree with the gentleman in the front, so I don't know your name. This is the referendum is about choosing the constitutional future of Scotland. Now, I happen to disagree with Graham in Tasmania about what is the right choice for Scotland. I have a different vision of that. But we should not conflate the policy questions with the constitutional framework. If we do that, we're going to get bogged down on who had the best spending choice. We've got to really go down on the detail of what is the best future for Scotland. And the point I want to make is that, well, a spending choice was made by the Scottish Government to remove 130,000 places in further education. Now, I happen to believe, having been in further education, that it's vitally important for the poorest people in our society who very often go to further education first because they don't get to go to university. The SNP do not have a monopoly on this. However, before I contradict my own point, I just want to John Swinney, who I have a great deal of respect for and worked with for 12 years in the Scottish Parliament, there was a leaked note, Tasmania will be aware of this, where he reports to the Scottish Cabinet about the implications of independence, and it's here if anybody wants to read it. And he is honest enough to say in this minute that we need to be mindful about the pressures that could reduce resources available to provide additional public services. Even in an independent Scotland, there's still going to be pressure on the budget, and it's just a nonsense to suggest it's all going to be solved by voting yes on the day.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's get back to the question on this one, which was about education, whether we can afford it or not. There's no question the fact that Scotland is a wealthy enough country which collected all its own taxes, spent them, and had the government do what it wants to do on the subject, could afford education as it is. Right now, without an increase in the country's wealth or without an increase in taxation, it could be afforded now, easily. So it's not a question of can it. The question is whether it should control its own affairs on the planet. To me, it's self-evident. Anybody from Africa or the Caribbean or even from Asia knows the value of independence. So it makes sense just generally that a country should control its own affairs. But in terms of the policy choices and your question about the promises yes, SNP should be made accountable for whatever promises it makes. But that's what we have a general election in 2016 for. If they don't hold up to that promise post-referendum, and indeed in the negotiations we're going to be having in this next 18 months about what the economic constitution will be, what the country's assets will be, and also what the constitution will be. If that free education is not enshrined in the constitution, there will be an uproar amongst many of the SNP's own support. So I think it's very highly likely that some form of recognition of the right to free education is going to be in our constitution. If it's not, there will be an uproar to pay. And frankly, socialists like myself will be fighting for it to be in the constitution, so that we do not have we have free education. But it should be pointed out, why haven't they introduced free education for students in England and Wales? Answer is Westminster parties and government are committed to privatising public services and access to it. They want big multinationals to control these things. That's why they're making good pay.
Well, thank you. I'm going to take one more question over there, the gentleman in the red shirt, and then we'll move on.
Okay, so UK government have made it extremely difficult for international students to come here and study. Won't Scotland leave the UK to keep out international links to that?
Okay, so did everybody catch that question? No. Okay, so I'll just repeat it.
Could you repeat it?
Okay, no, I'll repeat it. The UK government made it extremely difficult for international students to come here and study. Want a Scotland free of the UK keep out international links? So how are we going to, will the policy change post-independence? But I want to bring Shiraz in, and then we'll come back to the yes side, okay?
I suppose for me, a lot of these issues come up to what the set up for a post in Scotland would be. There's a lot of questions that haven't been answered. It suits the panel to suggest when it comes to what we want, what Independent Scotland would want, whether UK would agree with what we're trying to do. And when it suits, when the shoes in the other foot, you will condemn them as being capitalists and privateers. There's a lot of questions that, on a very basic level, that this panel hasn't been able to answer, in terms of currency, in terms of border control, in terms of immigration policy. And I think the question that you're asking touches on a lot of these other issues, and I think it's very difficult to say.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's important to note in terms of negotiations that what we're debating is the constitutional questions Paul correctly speaks of. This is about a political union that isn't working for Scotland as it currently stands. That does not detract from the fact that we have a social union with the rest of the United Kingdom. It doesn't detract from the fact that in terms of the Edinburgh Agreement, a legal document, we're required to enter into negotiations with the rest of the United Kingdom and implement the will of the Scottish people. And that will be done in entirely good faith. I would expect nothing less from, I'm just going to come on to this because that point was made. Thank you. So I think it's an important point to me. We're going to go into those negotiations but with good spirits and high hopes, and I'm sure we'll come out with a solution that suits both parties. As I say, we're not the first country to become independent. The point you make is a correct one in terms of immigration policies do not work for Scotland. They do not work for international students who want to come here. In fact, the principal of Glasgow University, Professor Anton Muscatelli's own words are that the UK immigration policies have had a detrimental effect in attempts to attract the best and brightest talent to the UK. And our message that we give to the world is, don't come here because we're closed for business and closed for education. Now that's a principal of Glasgow University, a learned person who understands what he's talking about in this context. I think we need to ensure that immigration policy welcomes students to come here, to enjoy the benefit we have of 5 of the top 200 universities in the world. But beyond that, let's allow them to make their lives here. Let's allow them to invest their time and future in this country and benefit us not just economically, but culturally and spiritually, and in all of the ways that we enjoy the relationships we have with the countries from all over the world. So I see a more international Scotland, welcoming people from all over the world who have so much to contribute. And it's very important for, I think, our own, as students within universities, the tremendous asset that international students bring shouldn't be underestimated. We need to make sure we do more to engender that.
And pass to Pauline. Pauline, what do you think? Will the status quo change on international students?
Yeah, I think we're probably all agree that Scotland has a very successful university sector, and international students are very important to that sector, not least because they're charged extortionate fees, I believe, by those universities, which is a bit of concern to me, I have to say. I don't deny that there is an issue, I think, in some universities where they're not allowing the free flow as universities would like for some foreign students to come here. But I do think it's resolvable within the devolution settlement. We used to have a programme called the Fresh Talent Initiative, to at least I think until 2008. And the Fresh Talent Initiative was the flexibility in immigration law to allow international students to come here, to study here, and when they complete the studies, remain for 2 years if they can achieve employment. So I just believe that we can correct some of the things that are wrong within the devolution settlement. We've done it before, we can do it again.
Thank you, yeah. I'm going to let Graham come in and then we'll move on.
Actually, I want to welcome the fact that the Fresh Talent Initiative happened. And when it did happen, we had a massive increase in the number of African students here. Good reason, because Scottish universities are good for business, finance, and oil industries. The trouble is that that system was withdrawn because of racist pressure on the Labour government policy at the time before it left office. And that we've had the difficulty that people now come to Scottish universities, study here for 3-4 years, and then they can't stay here for us to benefit from the contribution they've already made. For example, 80% of the students that are on oil courses are from Africa, Asia, China. Without them, those courses would not be viable because not enough Scottish students want to do them. Sad, but that's the truth of it. Now, if we want those kind of courses and the excellence of academia that we have in Scotland to continue, we have to treat our foreign students better. We have to actually encourage more of them to stay. So the Scottish Government in its paper has actually said it wants to reintroduce the post-work study visa. More to the point, on other questions of immigration and in terms of welcoming and border controls. Well, I want the end of the UK border agency, all the evil decisions that it's made on visas, applications, doorways, Gable, a lot of it. One of the first big commitments of the Scottish Government, if we vote yes, will be to close down Gable, which will give the asylum seekers the right to work. So all these people who are also students, by the way, we want that kind of UK gone, because I think Scotland wants to be a different place and a different country on those considered questions, and that's the first step. If we get that, the Scottish Government is saying they will introduce post-study work visas, make the students' time here much better and contribute to our economy.
Okay, thank you very much, Graham. We're now actually going to move on to our final topic of the evening, which is foreign policy, and then we'll open it up to the floor for all your exciting questions. Is it about foreign policy?
Yes.
Okay, you may go. Unless we have anybody else. I'd like to foreign policy number 11.
I'm not too sure if the question makes sense though.
Okay.
Foreign policy, this is word for word, this is what kind of presence will an independent Scotland have in the world after? I think I meant after independence.
After independence, yeah. Okay, and we'll let...
I'll let her answer the
Okay, so I think we'll go to this side, which is Shiraz, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, I think the most important foreign policy question that Scotland faces will be its relationship with the EU. There's a lot of questions that are unanswered, and let me pose some of them to the panelists, and maybe they can help sort out the issues. There's talk about immigration and getting rid of the border control agency. The UK and Ireland, they have an opt-out from the Schengen Agreement. We aren't part of the Schengen Agreement. We have a common travel area between us with the UK and Ireland. If an independent Scotland's immigration policy diverges from the rest of the UK, there's a real threat that we might face, and we would have to face border controls going from Scotland to the rest of the UK. Well, I think the EU is our most important relationship. The SNP is banking a lot on a close relationship with the EU. The other thing I would ask was, in terms of the EU, how long will it take Scotland to? I don't doubt for a second that Scotland will eventually join the EU, but how long will it take? And what sort of terms, what agreement will we reach when we join the EU? The UK has a VAT rebate at the moment. Will we still get to keep that? The UK has a rebate from the EU at the moment. Will we still get to keep that? There's subsidies in place at the moment from the EU that have been agreed by and concluded by previous governments. Will we still get to keep those subsidies? So I think the most important question is our relationship with the EU.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to address some of Shiraz's comments, then I'm going to actually answer your question, which you posed, which is an excellent one. You mentioned the relationship with the EU, and we are all citizens of the EU. We have been for over 40 years, and as a lawyer I can confirm to you that we cannot be removed from the EU, nor can we be stripped of our rights. You talk about the UK rebates, Shiraz. As a matter of fact, once we negotiate our position from within the EU with the rest of the United Kingdom, the rest of the United Kingdom position fundamentally changes in terms of the number of people who are going to be members of the EU. So indeed, there'll be a negotiation relative to rebates from both sides of the border, Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. In terms of your foreign policy questions, answer it. An independent Scotland will not seek to be a global superpower or a bully on the world stage. We hope to be a friendly and cooperative neighbour, a beacon of hope and peace for the rest of the United Kingdom, and about time too. You will not see an independent Scotland taking us into illegal wars. And on that very note, I would like to quote Craig Murray, a former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, who's been speaking lately about his time at the Foreign Commonwealth Office, who advised me directly, and of course it's on YouTube for everyone to see. His position is that the UK is a rogue state in terms of how it conducts itself in foreign planes, and is in actual fact, his quote, a danger to the world. Now, when he was working for the Foreign Commonwealth Office, he confirmed that Blair and the team in power at the time knew very well there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Now, I don't want weapons of mass destruction in Scotland. I want them removed from Scotland. I think they're an abhorrence. I think they're nothing but a tool to frighten other nations of the world that I don't want to have anything to do with whatsoever. They're 30 miles from where my children are growing up and playing in the back garden, and an end needs to come to that. We're not going to spend £100 billion on renewing a system of Trident. And at the same time, say to other countries that you cannot have weapons of mass destruction. We went into Iraq illegally. We've left that country in absolute ruins, and we're going to be answering for that for many years to come.
Right, I'd like to go to the gentleman with the shirt, and then okay, can you go?
You spoke about Alex Salmon, didn't want to continue Kosovo, and would you say that was correct? Because I know that you were actually against Alex Salmon saying that when you were.
So the gentleman's talking about intervention in Kosovo. The man over there, yeah.
Which campaign is going to stand up to Zionist Israel?
Okay.
We got beaten up for it the other day.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we'll go to Pauline and then we'll come back to Graham. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. I have to say I have a lot of respect for the EA's position on this question of foreign policy. Who wouldn't welcome the chance to rewrite the wrongs of what's happened in the past? But we can't remove Scotland's involvement in everything if you look back at our history, and I think it's a nonsense to suggest that we could. But as someone who's campaigned for a change in British foreign policy for as long as I can remember, and in particular a change in foreign policy, yeah. I've campaigned for a change in foreign policy in Britain and continue to do so. I'm part of Labour Friends of Palestine, and I believe that we have been influential within the Labour Party. I don't want to remove myself from having the influence I believe we have. I mean, the idea that Britain will still continue to influence the world, and I still want to influence Britain and the way it behaves in the world. Which is why, when it comes down to it, I'm quite comfortably going to be voting no on that basis. Because the idea that Scotland can be as influential as it would really like to be it is not the case. Although, as I said when I opened, I have a lot of respect for the Yes position on this. But there's a lot of change that Britain has to meet, I believe, not just in its attitude to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but in the complex areas of foreign policy about the rise of ISIS, about what's happening across the region, what's happening in Syria. I just want a say in that, and I want to be part of influencing that within the United Kingdom.
Thank you. I'm going to pass over to Graham. So Graham, what do you think? Would an independent Scotland be as powerful and influential in foreign policy?
Well, the question is what kind of influence does the United Kingdom have now? You can see that the Ukraine has precisely zero. You can see that over the Middle East, that it has no real influence because it can't stop Israel doing what it's doing to the people of Gaza. It doesn't want to either because the Americans won't let them. Same goes for their nuclear deterrence, so-called independence. They can't use it without the Americans' permission. So we are lapdog. We're the 51st state I don't want to be an adjunct to American foreign policy and global domination. I want an independent country that stands up for human rights in the world, stands up for justice, for nuclear disarmament. I want that kind of country, a peaceful country that has equal relations with the rest of the world. Now that's possible, it's achievable, because that's the mindset, I think, of the majority of people in this country. It'd be nice to have a foreign policy which reflected that. Instead of sending warplanes, we should be sending hospital ships to all these zones around the world. We could be doing that. That sort of aircraft carrier could building govern as well. That's what we should be, but we can't be if we stay in the United Kingdom. But I have a very special reason for wanting to keep the separation, if you like, if they want to call it that. I want the end of the United Kingdom. I want the end of the empire. The empire can end if you vote it on September the 18th. The idea of Britain as this global superpower, which they still have in their minds down there, that has to stop. And it can be stopped by you voting democratically in a ballot box. And if you can do that, you will make world peace that little bit step nearer. And hopefully justice for the Palestinians. Now, I want to say this last thing about the Palestinians, that, of course, probably unanimity on this panel about the injustice of what's going on in Gaza, and lots of us will be on the streets campaigning about it. I know Pauline's done a hell of a lot on this subject. I want to flag up that she told me just before we started this that she'll be doing a fundraising concert for Gaza in September. She'll be singing. She's too modest to actually say that she's going to be doing this, but that will be sometime in September. So after this referendum, please let's unite around the support of people of Gaza.
When I come in, she promises she's only going to do 2 seconds. I'll be holding her to it. Okay, and then Gerard, I'll let you talk about the end of empire.
Merely to add my comments to what Graham has said, and again, praise Pauline for the hard work that she does and continues to do for the people of Gaza. I think it fundamentally comes down to the question of foreign policy. Who's best placed to decide what the foreign policy should be? And I think in terms of Scotland and Scotland's place in the world, it should be the people of Scotland who elect the government to best reflect in terms of their policy the kind of persona we want to have on an international stage. Where the UK stands in terms of Gaza, I think the position's been made apparently clear by the resignation of Baroness Varsi, who felt she had to do that. She couldn't continue to sit around the table with people who did not see what was going on in Gaza was fundamentally in breach of human rights and against the grain of pure human decency. So I think the only way to avoid such situations is to take control of foreign policy within our own hands, because we can't rely on Westminster to deliver that for us. We've seen it time and time again. Well, I think Westminster's time is up, and let's do it for ourselves.
Quick question.
Thank you very much.
You talked about the Tories. I'm talking about independent Scotland, what you're going to do for the Muslim countries across the globe. I'm not talking about, Baroness Varsi, resigning. That's what I'm doing.
Well, it doesn't seem because it's talking
By the way,
about...
there are some other people in this room, so I think...
Okay, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to let Gerard come back, and then we'll open it up, and we'll see who else has some questions.
Just very briefly on Gaza, it was a Labour demonstration in Glasgow that raised the Palestinian flag a few weeks ago, and who also contributed to the Gaza Relief Fund from the Labour Party's own fund. But I think we are talking about foreign policy, and independent Scotland's most important foreign relationship will be with the EU, from what our currency will be, from what our interest rates will be, from what our VAT rate will be, from whether or not we will have border controls. I'll come to it in a second. From whether or not we will have border controls with the rest of the UK. All these decisions will be made by the negotiations that we have with the EU. Without doubt, the most important relationship for Scotland, the most important foreign relationship with Scotland will be with the EU. In terms of the end of empire, I think the country of the UK has been a force for good. I mean, we touched upon. I mean, no one's saying there haven't been mistakes, but on the whole, I think the UK has been a force for good. I mean, the gentleman at the back, he touched upon Kosovo for a second. I mean, that was an intervention made by the UK government to save Muslims, if you're talking about Muslim issues. But on a wider point, I mean, look at what's happening right now, what we're discussing right now. We're discussing a referendum, a peaceful movement for Scotland to become separate from the rest of the UK. How many other democratic countries would allow a big chunk of its country to secede without any bullets being fired, without any violence? And I'm talking about countries like Spain or Canada, and I want to mention about African countries. We've seen civil wars there or the subcontinent. And I think that's testament to the fact that the UK government has allowed Scotland to have a referendum. Well, the legal position is that the legal position is that the Westminster government legally has allowed Scotland to secede, and I think that's testament to the fact that we live in a country, we live in the UK as a family of nations, and I'm keen to keep. The mayor of the empire. We were the post-colonial regeneration, and I'm keen and I'm proud of my country.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open it up to the floor now. Does anybody else have questions? Anybody else? Okay, yeah, the man over there.
The present Chancellor, Mr. Osborne, has announced his plans for 25 or 26 billion pounds of further austerity cuts. And Mr. Ed Balls, who is the Shadow Chancellor, has confirmed publicly that he's going to stick to that plan of reducing further public expenditure. With those announcements, if we were to remain with the UK, how do those who advocate a no vote suggest that we tackle the 20% of young people throughout Scotland, the 30% in Glasgow, and the 50% in certain wards in Glasgow of our young people who are continuing presently to live in poverty, let alone the extra 100,000 who it's anticipated will be added to these figures, and which some of the panel mentioned earlier.
Does anybody have any questions before I hand it over to the other side to ask? Okay, Colin, can I bring you in?
Well, again, we're back to policy questions. I mean, the idea that we can just completely escape austerity by voting for independence is just not true. And I go back to the late minute where John Spinney himself accepts there would be severe public spending constraints in an independent Scotland. But the question of the 20% of young people living in poverty, of course, the Labour Party has strategies for dealing with anti-poverty. But in 7 years of the SNP administration, they have not revisited the anti-poverty strategy. They haven't brought forward a single redistributive policy in their time of government. So if we want to get down to who's better at tackling poverty, well, let's have that debate. I get back to what I'm here to talk about, which is, at the end of the day, we're here to decide what we think is the best future for Scotland. What is the best framework? Is it being better to be part of both worlds, which I believe we are, Scotland be part of the United Kingdom, or do you see a future of an independent Scotland on its own, completely separate? And from that, that's what we're here to debate this afternoon. And I hope that answers your question.
Not quite.
Okay, I'll let Shiraz come in, and you get Paul when we come in as well. Okay?
What I'd be keen to hear from the yes side is what the startup costs in independent Scotland would be. The white paper, the SNP's white paper, is famously unbudgeted. The Treasury did a cost analysis on that paper, and they've come up with an astonishing figure. Now, John Spinney was asked to verify this figure 13 or 14 times on Radio 4, or at the very least give his figure, what he thought the startup cost would be in independent Scotland. I have yet to hear, and I'm keen to hear from anyone in the audience on the panel, what the startup cost would be in independent Scotland. The startup cost in independent Scotland would pale into insignificance any austerity measures brought in by the Tory coalition. So what I want to ask is, and I would echo what Pauline said, independence doesn't mean there won't be any austerity. In fact, with the uncosted projections that the SNP is positing, it might be worse austerity.
Okay, both of you can.
All right. Okay. Let's start with the question about powers, because I really think this is a question about powers. This is what Labour's sort of devolution commission kind of came up with in terms of what Joanne Lamont had to say. Now, she said that when she told a Northern Echo audience in Newcastle that, there'll be no further devolution of powers down south. Don't forget about it. There'll be no increase of spending to Scotland. Yet Ian Davidson, the very famous Glasgow South West Labour MP, said that if they remove the Barnett formula, that would disadvantage Scotland. So staying within the Union, when it's very likely that they want to either abolish or change the Barnett formula, would lead to less public spending in Scotland. That's what Labour will do in office. They know the cuts are coming, and they are going to stick to the Tory budget. So that's what we're going to get. We're going to get austerity if we stay in the UK. That's as definite. The question then is, what will we do about that? Will we have a chance to avoid austerity politics because we're wealthy enough to pay for all our social pensions, social education, social welfare in an independent country? Now, you might argue, and I know my friend over there will argue, well, what about the people with incomes in Wales? Well, I think they will be inspired by our different choices and the way that we structure our country differently to change their country. Because I think the best thing we can do for them is to show them that there is a way different to austerity, different to the cuts. That's the way we do it, by voting yes on September the 18th.
To come back to the gentleman's question, I don't think it is a question of policy, because what you're asking is, are we going to leave it to Westminster to make all of our decisions in terms of how our budget should be run, how our economy should be run, or should we take that power within our own hands? And of course, I believe we should take the power within our own hands and not have policies imposed upon us like the bedroom tax, which the Scottish Parliament required to mitigate against. The purpose of the Scottish Parliament is not as a mitigation chamber at all. It should be a chamber that is involved in policy making across all areas that affect us. Now again, in as usual fashion, Shiraz completely avoided your question, but started to talk about start-up costs. I welcome that. I'll tell you why I welcome that. Because Professor Patrick Dunleavy was misquoted exponentially in terms of the start-up costs for an independent Scotland, which are figured at £200 million. Let's put that in a framework. £200 million as compared to £100 billion to renew weapons of mass destruction. And here's another one. £5,000 million contribution towards HS2 that doesn't come north of Manchester. So for £200 million, which is a drop in the ocean for the prize we will have finally to decide our future for ourselves in all issues that affect us.
Thank you very much. Right, thank you very much. Now we're actually at the end of our. Well, I'm going to give you your 1 minute of fame in a second. We're at the end of our panel today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let each of our speakers give you their pitch, their last performance of the night, and what I'd like to really get them to focus on is, a lot of people are very sick of the debate in itself. Everyone's yes or no. Some people have just had enough. So I'd like to tell them why you should vote, why it is important, and the impact of a yes or no vote for the future of Scotland. So I think we'll go with Shiraz first. Yeah? Okay.
Folks, the SNP have been working towards a yes. I mean, many respected and honourable people within the SNP have made a very intellectually honest case for independence. And they've been working towards that case for independence since the 30s. They were working for the case for independence when the greatest post-war government this country has ever seen, a Labour government, introduced the NHS and the welfare state. That was us, and we did that. Devolution was again another Labour achievement, and we did that. And during all those times, the SNP were campaigning for a yes vote for independence. They weren't talking about food banks or welfare dependency back in the 30s or the 40s or the 50s or the 60s or the 70s or the 80s and the 90s. They were talking about independence. That's been the goal from day one. Now, what I want a lot of people here to realise is, I know what does it mean the status quo. There is change happening. All three Unionist parties are come in favour of further devolution. Now, you don't even need to believe the promises. The 2012 Scotland Act, which is already law, allows the Scottish Parliament to get more powers, tax raising powers, or any other areas it feels necessary. This is already law. You don't need to believe the promises of any politician. The 2012 Scottish Act is already passed. Devolution will progress and deepen automatically as and when Scotland wants it. And I think within the UK, as a family, living within a family of nations, I think we need to put the best of both worlds. And I really do believe, folks, you should all vote no come September 18th. Thank you very much.
Right. There are three basic reasons why you should think about. Sorry, there's three basic reasons why you should think about voting yes. There's basically the political, which is to do with who controls government and how you select government and getting the government you vote for. Fundamentally, parties that you didn't vote for are deciding what economic and social policy you have. That's why you have the benefit there. Parties that have no chance of being elected here in Scotland are deciding what Scotland's policy should be. So just on the democratic question alone, you should vote yes. Then there's the question of anti-imperialism and war. If you want an end to the kind of foreign policies, then we need to be not in the kind of state that thinks it's an imperial power. We have to decolonize our minds and our state organization. To do that, you can do that by voting yes, peacefully, to disband the United Kingdom once and for all. And that means no more wars in Iraq, no more nuclear weapons, no more foreign policy that does the Americans' bidding. Then you have the final case, which is really economic. It's very obvious that a country which has got the resources and the diverse economy that it has is more than capable of being an independent country that's successful, that in fact has the reduction of poverty and inequality. We could have full employment in this society. We are rich enough to have that. The reason why we don't have that is because we don't have control of the powers. It's then the case of what governments you elect to control those powers. Now, from my view, as a socialist, I want to see a society where the rich pay the proper taxes, that corporations are controlled, where they're not allowed to destroy the environment or frack all over the country. I want to see the end of food banks. I want to see the end of nuclear weapons. And, you know, if we have those things, we'll have a fairer society. We've got a chance of doing that if we vote yes. We have no chance of any of those things happening if we vote no. It will be more of the same. More poverty, more inequality, more rich bankers telling our politicians what to do. I don't want that kind of future for myself or my children.
Hand over to Pauline. Thank you very much, and thank you to the Federation of Islamic Students for organising today's debate, and it's been one of the more temperate debates I've been at, so I've really quite enjoyed it so far. And it's a serious debate we're having about, we all passionately believe what we believe, and it is important that we have a civilised manner to do that. But I do genuinely believe that Scotland gets the best of both worlds. I have its own Scottish Parliament, with its devolved powers, and being part of the United Kingdom. I've always campaigned for deeper powers for that Parliament, and in 2017, whoever's in power, that Parliament will vote on the Scottish budget and will have to do so every year after that, unless of course vote for independence on the 18th of September. But no party has used those tax raising powers. We've had them since 1999. And it's important to note that we could have used up to 2 pence in the pound if we wanted to. Whether there's public consensus to use those tax powers remains to be seen. I'm arguing that there will be there's no barriers to trade, a single market, a successful United Kingdom, successful investment where Scotland has been the greatest beneficiary of that outside London. To share the risks and to pool the resources is being part of the United Kingdom, and I believe that that has served Scotland well. That's not to say that there aren't major areas for change. I've campaigned against our energy companies and the power of the energy companies and the prices that they charge ordinary people, and I don't really see that changing with independence. I've not heard any discussion so far about that. The power of the banks, bankers' bonuses, all these big institutions that through the global crisis has shocked each and every one of us about how much power they have in our society is not going to change by voting for independence. Independence will not allow us to escape austerity. I accept there's an argument to do things in a different way. I've referred to what is an honest minute that was given to the cabinet by John Swinney that actually says that there will still be austerity. I have to finish on this point. The Yes campaign want to keep the monarchy, the Bank of England, the National Lottery, Transport Service, the Air and Maritime Accident Investigation Branches, the Committee on Radioactive Waste Management, the Green Investment Bank, the Met Office, and the BBC. So, in some ways, what is a better advert to be part of something bigger than that, because they want to keep that all the same.
Thank you very much indeed. I think the nail was hit on the head tonight when we saw just how many times the word allow was used during tonight's discussion. Allowed perhaps to share the currency, allowed us to have a referendum. Well, to me, as a woman, as a Muslim woman, as an Asian woman, I don't think we're now living in a world of being allowed to do anything. I think the time has come and the opportunity has come and presents itself for us to take our future into our own hands, not wait for Westminster to dictate to us how things might happen. Now that works fine if there's a democracy, but there is no democracy when in Scotland we've had a government we haven't voted for in 26 out of the last 44 years. We have a Tory government at Westminster with 1 MP. So fundamentally it is a question of democracy. With independence we can be guaranteed we will always have the governments that we vote for. And Scotland is on a journey. Devolution has worked, but it hasn't gone far enough. It needs to go further. Because I don't want powers that have been loaned to us. I want powers that we will have forever. And I believe the time has truly come for us as individuals, the people of Scotland, to have confidence in ourselves and in our ability to do things so much better, because we all know we can afford to be independent. The question is, should we? Well, I would say to you, yes, has a vision. It is ambitious. All of our messengers are ambitious in their approach to the future. And on the 18th of September, the people will have sovereignty in their hands between 7 a.m. in the morning and 10 o'clock at night. The power to make the decision that will affect generations to come. No other nation in history has been as well prepared as Scotland to become independent. Becoming independent goes very much with the tide as opposed to against it. And I believe we have absolutely everything going for us here in Scotland except the power to use it. So I'm going to ask you to vote with me, vote for your families, vote for the nation that's taken us to its heart, which is Scotland. Vote for Scotland and vote yes. Thank you.
So that's us at the end of our very, very, very fun independence debate. I've got a few thanks to say, but first of all, can we all please just put your hands again together once more for the panel? On behalf of the Federation of Student Islamic Societies in Scotland, I'd like to thank all of the panelists for coming here today. Putting on an independence debate 18 days before the vote has not been easy. I'd like to thank SUMSA for helping support us with the venue, for National. I mean, just so many people have helped us on this journey to be here. I'd like to thank you all for coming and putting up with me as chair. I think that was nice enough, right? But thank you very much. We actually are able to register people to vote outside, so if you haven't already registered, we've got a lot of polling booths outside. I would encourage you all to vote, to actively look into it, read up on it. There's so much information. You really do need to make the right choice, whatever it is for you. Respect each other's opinions, be nice. It's good to have a healthy debate, and hope we did that today. And everybody really, just have a very nice evening. 18 days to go, so we'll be seeing you at polling stations. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Guys, have your time for 2 minutes. We'll take 1 minute. If you haven't registered yet for the vote, we're just registering people outside. I know the chair said it just around the corner. Just come round. We have the forms there. If you haven't registered yet, just do that right now.
Yeah, that was brilliant. No,
I was towards
If you believe in voluntarism, That's not when people will have that choice. When they buy it, they'll be able to vote.